We're going to kick off in the Song of Songs, chapter 4. So we are taking this little 8-chapter book into 3 sections. And we looked at chapter 1, 2, and 3 the last time we were together. And, I almost always say that, if you missed a lesson, just go back and grab it online and watch it again. And watch it and you'll catch up. But, this book, the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs, it's that different of a book that I'm just going to tell you. If you missed the first 3 chapters, don't even bother to go back. Just go get alone with the Lord and read it. That's the way to look at this whole book. Scholars over the years have looked at this book in different layers, different ways to interpret it. And all of them are valid. All 4 of these major ways that people have interpreted this book are very, very valid. That number 1, it shows the glory of wedded love. And it is. It's a glorious picture of groom and bride together. And it all starts there. And that's kind of the way you interpret the scripture. You look at the face value of what the Lord is saying, and then you say, okay, well, what's he trying to say on purpose spiritually? And then you look deeper and you see more. Jesus gave entire stories that way, right? Like he would tell parables on purpose to say, I'm going to tell you a fake story that's very, practical. It has practical value in it. However, it's not meant for that. It's meant for the spiritual, right? And so it's the same idea when we come to the Word of God in the book of the Song of Solomon. Yes, it has a very practical understanding of wedded love. But it goes much deeper than that. God's love is here pictured for Israel. All of the ancient Israelis looked at the book that way. Certainly you could see a picture of Christ's love for the church. In Ephesians, the Lord tells us that we should see ourselves as the bride of Christ. And there's so much imagery in the scripture about the wedding and the wedding feast of the Lamb that we're going to go to. That's why when the 7-year tribulation is happening on earth, that's what we're doing in heaven, right? We're having the marriage supper of the Lamb, and we're the bride. If you're in the church, you are in the bride. You are of the bride. You are the bride, okay? And that's what we're going to be doing for those 7 years in heaven. And so even when we get into 1 Thessalonians coming up soon, this is one of the sort of sub-arguments, lines of reasoning that we use to talk about why the church is not here during the tribulation, because the Lord doesn't take a battered bride, right? He's not going to put us through the tribulation and then say, let's go to heaven for the wedding. That doesn't make sense. In all of the pictures, they all agree and they all line up. So I really encourage us to look at this book as a love story, not even just between Christ and his church, but between Christ and you. Put your name here. This book was written to show me Jesus Christ's love for me as an individual. That's just how different this book is. That the very primary purpose of the book is for that. Many books of the Bible, the very primary purpose is to teach us something that we need to understand, right? So that we then can fall in love with Christ. But this book is different in that the very primary purpose of the book is to fall in love with Christ. It's not trying to teach us. What are we gonna learn that we didn't know ahead of time? What are you gonna know how to do vineyards after this and know how to dress vines and you're not gonna learn things in that way. We're gonna learn to fall in love with Jesus Christ, and that's what this book is doing. I hope in our hearts, in our minds. So we're not gonna leave primarily the wiser, but we're gonna leave primarily deeper in love with Christ. So if chapters 1, 2, and 3, if we saw in those chapters a love that draws us, and that's what it was. It was really a picture of the groom coming in to sweep her off her feet. The bride. That's what we saw, this Shulamite woman to Solomon, the king. If that was what the first 3 chapters were really epitomized, was a love that draws us, well, the middle part of this book, like any good story, brings the conflict. Okay, so chapter 4, 5, and 6, I really think you could customize, or you could categorize as a love that restores us, because that's an essential nature of our relationship with Christ, isn't it? You can't have a relationship with Christ unless you understand not just that he has a love that draws us, but that he has a love that's willing to say to us in all of our shortcomings, in all of our, even if it's just indifferences, I still love you. And that's the middle of this book. That's the big story in the middle of this love story. I was recently told, and I think it's a great way to look at this book, that if you sit down with this Song of Songs and you sit down with the King of Kings and read this Song of Songs, you will find it to be the Holy of Holies. And I think that's a great way to look at this book. You think of the love that draws us in the first 3 chapters being this love that even from creation is calling to his creation saying, I made you, I love you, come to me. Looking for Adam and Eve in the cool of the garden. I love you, where are you? And now the sin has entered, and now we're going to see this imperfect relationship between this bride and her groom. So even specifically in chapter 5, we'll see the missteps of the bride in chapter 5. So these chapters here tonight, 4, 5, and 6, really bring us through the process from the perfect relationship at salvation, seen as salvation in chapter 4, right through the restored relationship, the one that has been through the troubles, the one that has confessed our lack of being everything that we should be. And we've confessed that, and we come out on the other end in what? In deeper relationship with him, right? Have you found that to be true? That, you see that even in earthly relationships, that as you have a relationship, maybe it's a job, right? And you have this initial relationship. It's like, oh, we like each other, but we don't know much about each other. But, oh, yeah, it's a good thing. And then something happens, and you blow up that thing, or the thing breaks, or something happens, or the place floods out, or what, things happen, okay? And you come through it. And you come through, and then you're stronger because of it, right? And I hope you've seen that in relationships. I hope you've seen that in marriages, that you come out stronger because of having been through those things. And so when I title this message here for chapter 4, 5, and 6, A Love That Restores Us, I really believe that that's an even deeper love than that initial love that draws us. Now it's like, man, not only does he love me enough to draw me, but he even will find a way through my imperfections and my sin to restore me, to be in a right place with him. So let's look through chapter 4, 5, and 6 at some different stages in this relationship as we go towards the process of reconciliation, because the trouble really doesn't come until chapter 5. I think you'll see in chapter 4, it really still pictures a pretty idealistic relationship between the bride and her groom. So in chapter 4, as this begins, I really think this shows us the first stage of this relationship, which is enjoying the perfection. And even more specifically, it's interesting that chapter 4 shows us this perfection as in a garden, which is really interesting because I think it even pictures the cycle of redemption of the human race. That there we were in the garden as a human race, perfect and created. And that's where it all begins. But then it all soon goes downhill from there. So we open up chapter 4, and if you don't remember, one of the keys to kind of navigating your way through this book is the beloved is Solomon, the groom, and my love is her. It's the Shulamite woman. It's the bride. So that kind of helps us navigate our way through. Sometimes you have other people that will talk. In here, sometimes you'll have a chorus of women that talk for a verse or two, and we have to remember it's a song. This was literally a song. Okay, we don't have the meter and the rhyme anymore, and all those fancy symbols and things to put it all together. We don't have that. But so remember that sometimes when it changes voice from one person to another person talking, you're like, whoa, what's happening? It's a song. It's literally a song that we're trying to meter our way through. So make sure you kind of remember that. And then it'll help you to remember why it sometimes seems choppy. Because it's not meant to be read as like some rigid narrative. It's not. It's a love song. It's a love. Can I just say that one more time to you? This is very different. It's very similar to when we're going to get to the Psalms, and we're going to start reading the Psalms, except for this is the Song of Songs. So it's meant to be read in kind of that unique way. So we open up chapter 4, and it's Solomon, it's the groom, it's the picture of Jesus speaking. In chapter 4, it's verse 1, "Behold, thou art fair, my love." And remember, fair doesn't mean average, like, oh, you're fair. No, fair is wonderful. You are wonderful, my love. Behold, you are wonderful. For thou hast dove's eyes within thy locks. Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Mount Gilead. Thy teeth are as a flock of sheep. Sheep are white. That's good. Okay, we can get the imagery here. That are even shorn. So there, so some symmetry to the teeth. This is good. Which came up from the washing, whereof everyone bears twins. You don't have a big black hole on one side. Your teeth are symmetrical, and this is good. Everyone bears twins, and none is barren among them. That entire verse is just how wonderful her smile is. Okay, that's what that is all about there. So hair is black as goat's hair. That's good. Teeth are white. This is wonderful. So he's complimenting her in this way. And we go to verse 3. Thy lips are like a thread of scarlet, and thy speech is comely or wonderful. Thy temples are like a piece of pomegranate within thy locks. Ancient language here. Thy neck is like the Tower of David. Gentlemen, please use the intention, not the content, but the intent of these verses. Thy neck is like a Tower of David, built it for a armory, whereon there hangeth 1,000 bucklers, all shields of mighty men. Lips, good. Temples, good. Okay. So remember, the idea of what he's saying here, and don't get hung up on the imagery. Some of the ancient Hebrew poetry is just not going to translate, right? I've got to keep going here. Verse 6. Actually, verse 5. Verse 5 it is, thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins, which feed among the lilies. That's good. Nothing wrong there. Verse 6. And I do want to point this out. He's going to actually bring this up, I think it's 6 more times, right? And the idea there is the provision, the sustenance, the health. That's the idea behind that. And we're going to get to a later stage where he actually talks about her two brothers. We're going to talk about when she was young, and they call her the one with no breasts. And the idea is he's saying the one that was so young, she wasn't able to enter a relationship and provide and sustain and be the mother to the next generation, the idea. And so the idea of even the description is to say the one that's capable, the one that's equipped, the one that God has made for this. This is part of the idea. Verse 6, until the daybreak and the shadows flee away, I will get me to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of frankincense. Thou art all fair, my love. There is no spot in thee. Wow. Myrrh and frankincense mentioned here, used in both weddings and funerals. Both of these, and I don't think you can escape thinking of our relationship with Jesus Christ here as he mentions getting to the mountain of myrrh, the hill of frankincense, as Jesus dies on Mount Calvary, on the hill Golgotha. And they offered him the gall mixed, and he refused because he wanted to endure that in his right senses. And it's so fascinating here that as he's describing her and his place, and then finally in verse 7 there that we just read, he ends his description of her. Do you remember this one that said earlier, I'm a mixture. I'm black and yet I'm white like the curtains of Solomon. She had this realization within her that she knows who she is. She knows she's a sinner, but she knows she's been washed. And she set herself up as her own identity like that early on. And he looks at her now, and he ends this section of her beauty by saying, "You are all wonderful, my love. There is no spot in thee." That is an amazing thing to say. That is the way that Jesus Christ looks at you as a believer. As somebody that has come to the cross and had their sins washed, he now enters a relationship with you. He doesn't walk around with you in your sin. He walks around with you as a blood-bought saint. And he looks at us and says, "You're clean. You're washed. Let's move forward." And I just think there's so many people that they sit there in that place and say, "No, but I'm black. I'm black. No, I'm black." And Jesus is like, I look at you and I see no spot, nothing in you. Why can he say that? Because we serve a God that sees the end from the beginning, right? He knows the end from the beginning of time. He knows it. He knows that day where we are going to shed this mortal coil, right? This body, this fleshly body, and what else? This fleshly mind. We're going to shed those things. We're finally going to leave that sin behind. And we're going to get what? Glorified bodies, perfect brains. And we're going to inhabit eternity with Jesus Christ. In that state, you tell me where your sin is. It's not there, is it? And he looks at you, church, today, and he says, that's the way you are. Oh, you're still in this body. You're still hindered in this life. Oh, I get it. But when he looks at us, he sees the eternity of us. He sees a blood-bought saint that is going to walk into eternity and shed that. The moment we pass from death into eternal life, it's like the shedding of that sin nature. And that's what he's looking at. And so he can look at the bride right now and say, there is no spot in thee. I want to tell you a couple of verses from the New Testament that kind of speak to this point a little bit. Paul talked to the Romans, and he said, as it is written, so he's going to quote the Old Testament. He's talking about Abraham here. "I have made thee, Abraham, a father of many nations, before him, God, whom he believed," Abraham believed on God, even God, "who quickeneth," or brings to life, "the dead, and calls those things which be not as if they were." He looked at Abraham and said, "Oh, by the way, Abraham, you're going to have a child," right? And Abraham was like, "Body parts aren't working anymore, okay? Not going to happen, okay?" And God's like, "You're telling me what it's going to be?" God's thinking, "I've already seen the end from the beginning. I already know everything about your grandson Jacob. And you're telling me you're not even going to have a son?" See, God sees everything. He knows the end of your experience on this earth. He knows it all. And so he can look at Abraham and he can say, "Abraham, you are right now the father of many nations, even as you have no children at this moment in time." This is who you are in God's image, in God's eyes. Jude ends his little tweet by saying, "Now unto him, God, that is able to keep you from falling and also to present you faultless." Let me just take out the first phrase. "I write this letter unto God who is able to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy." That's his plan. He's going to present us before the Father and the holy angels as perfect, blood-washed saints of God, children, sons and daughters of the King. That's what his plan is. That's who we are. And that's going to last a lot longer than this world. You get that, right? So which one is your identity? What you think now, or that eternal identity that he has already made us into? And then finally, in Revelation, close to the end of the story, as we get to be with Christ, and the marriage supper is about to partake of. It says, to her, that's the bride of Christ, that's all of us, the church, to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For that fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. How do we get it? He gives it to us. He gives it to us. And this is how he sees you right now. This is my plan for you. He sees his plan and he says, there's nothing that can change my plan. It's my plan. I'm going to give you this white garment when I see you. So that's who you are. And so he can look at the bride and he can say, you are fair, my love. You are all fair. There is no spot in you. Now it's up to us to live for him. With that as the blessing. With that as the reality. Oh, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to have our struggles. But boy, if we could just remember that this is the way he sees us. How would that affect, how would that change the way we live for him, right? And let's go to verse 8. Verse 8, come with me, he says. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse, with me from Lebanon. Look from the top of Amana, from the top of Shinar and Mount Hermon, from the lion's dens, from the mountain of leopards. Thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. It's a call to go higher. It's a call to go further with him, is what he's saying. Come with me. Let's go further. Let's be together longer. There may even be lions there, he says, but let's keep going together. Let's keep doing this. Interesting, Mount Hermon, it mentions here, Mount Hermon is the highest point in Israel up in the north. And so he mentions this. Let's keep going. Let's go further. Let's go higher. The imagery is astounding. He's saying, listen, let's keep going. Let's brave the bravest places together. Let's do this. And he ended that there sort of in verse 9 by saying, maybe a way you could translate that where it says, my heart, you've ravished my heart with one of thine eyes. It's not, she's not cross-eyed or anything. The idea is with one look, with just one look, you've taken over my heart. You've stolen my heart with just one glance. That's kind of the idea, right? That's more than just a mental connection. I hope you see that. This isn't just some, agreement on paper. Yes, she will be my spouse. No. There is a connection at the heart level. Verse 10, he continues here in verse 10 and says, how fair is thy love, my sister, my spouse. How much better is your love than wine, and the smell of thine ointments is better than all spices. There's a wonderful filling of the soul in a loving relationship. And that's what he's saying here. Jesus himself is filled in our relationship. It fills him up. Have you ever thought about that? Why did he create you in the first place? Is it because he was somehow discontent? No, he was satisfied within himself even before creation. But he created because he wants to have relationship with us. Not because he needs it. He's satisfied within himself. But he has a loving longing to want to be with us. Would you consider that for just a second? He doesn't need your love to fill anything that's missing from him. He wants your love. That's different, right? I mean, I don't know. Generations ago, people were married out of some contract or some parental setup. In different cultures, they still do that, right? That's different than somebody that says, no, I want you. I want to marry you, right? In that way, isn't adoption even sort of that much more special when someone adopts a child? Because they're saying, I had a choice, and I wanted you. I love it that I know a lot of people that adopt that call the day they got their adopted child, they call it the gotcha day. Have you heard that before? People call that the gotcha day, and it's that it expresses that excitement of the day that it finally happens. It could be 6 months, it could be 2 years waiting for that child. And then finally that day comes and the gotcha day's here, you know. And that was a love that they chose to place on that child. Chosen love, it's a wonderful thing, amazing thing. Verse 11, he continues in verse 11, your lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under the tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. Don't, little pine sol, what is that? I don't know. Don't try that today, okay, gentlemen? But he's saying to be near you. I have great desire to be near you is the idea. This is the groom talking. This is the picture of Christ talking. Jesus longs to be near us, to go through life with us. You're not an afterthought to him. You are his thoughts. We are what he thinks about. He doesn't sit up there in heaven and say, oh, should I build some castles today? Should I construct something? Should I make something? No, he sits in heaven thinking about people. What can I do? How can I relate? How can I be with this person today? That's his heart. This is his longing to be close to his people. What a thing. Verse 12. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring that shuts up, a fountain sealed. And let's just be clear here. He is definitely talking about how she is a chaste virgin. That's what he's talking about. She has reserved herself for marriage. This is what he's saying. A fountain sealed up. Verse 13, thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphor with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all of the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. All of this imagery of the garden, right? And he's saying that this is what she is to him. She is this enclosed garden, right? It's not just shut up, but it's protected. It's preserved. It's sustained within itself. And he's describing her here as the garden. You know, the Lord always compares our relationship to him as a garden, not ever as work or as a factory. Never. John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches, right? It's always in the imagery of the garden. Why is that? Because doing has to be born out of love. Doing has to be born out of love. A garden just naturally produces fruit. It just does what it does, right? Chuck Smith in his book, it might be over there, Why Grace Changes Everything. He talks about that extensively. I think he has a whole chapter on this subject, this idea of all through the scripture, we're compared to the Lord as a garden and not a factory. Well, think of the differences. You know, a garden, what do? We just naturally produce fruit. We get fed by the water and the rays, and we naturally produce fruit. That's the Christian life. As opposed to the garden with all of its deadlines and burdens and labors and sweat and man's effort. That's not the Christian life. If you're experiencing that tonight, I'm going to call you out of that right now. That is not Christianity. If you feel pressured with deadlines and sweat equity and you're burdened and you're overwhelmed and you're living in a factory, that is not what Christ has for you. He wants to put you in his garden tonight. And so you could just get the chair out, soak in the rays, take in the water, and then you will naturally produce the fruit and the doing and all of those things by the great love that's being poured into you. It will then come out. I was so blessed that the other day, just one of the people that we just recently baptized, he called and he said, "Hey, I noticed on the prayer list that there's praying about a food pantry." He says, "I really want to be involved with that." Do you need any help? And I was like, you're exactly what I've been praying for. So this is what it means to be in the garden. You say, what's the Lord doing in your heart? Oh, okay, well, great, let's do it then. It's not about somebody going out and saying, hey, I really need you to do this. I'm really behind. Can you do this? I need it 6 days a week for the next 3 years. Can you please? Thank you. Have you ever been in a church like that? Man, I mean, maybe not that bad, but you get the idea, right? And it goes beyond church life. It goes into the whole of the way you act towards God, that you think you have to maintain, you have to keep up. Have you done this one? You put yourself on the yearly Bible plan, and then along about February the 2nd, you're like, I haven't done it. I'm burdened. I'm behind. what do I do? And you stress about it until about April, and then you give up, right? Have you done that? That's living in a factory. Stop it. Just don't do it. It doesn't benefit the Lord, and it doesn't benefit you. Stop with the guilt trips and the burdens and just do what the Lord's called you to do. Just do that. You don't have to do more than that. Live in this garden. I'm going to read it again. Can we read this garden again? Verse 12 through 16. Could you just look at that? And then we'll explain verse 16 because we didn't do that one. He talks in verse 12 through 15, and then she's going to respond in verse 16. So listen to this garden again. She is a garden enclosed, is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, camphor and spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all of the chief spices, a fountain of gardens, a well of living water and streams from Lebanon. As you look at this list, these things are not very many of these are native to Israel. These things picture things from all over the land, even over towards India. And so isn't that interesting? Just this idea that she's equipped. She's fully equipped with all of these things. She has the ability to produce in so many different ways. The Lord has given the church that. The ability to produce so much different types of efforts and fruits, but only by His Spirit. And finally, she responds here in verse 16. And she says, awake, O north wind, and come, thou south wind. Blow upon my garden, that the spices thereof may flow out. Let my beloved come into his garden and eat his pleasant fruits. And so she literally, on the surface text, she is enjoining him to come and enjoy her pleasures. And let's have the honeymoon. This is the idea, most literally, what she's saying. But you'll notice, as we go through the book here, have you noticed that she's now starting to talk less and less? She's getting this confidence now in who she is by his words. And she's allowing him to speak more and more and to remind her of who she is and what her identity is. And then she responds and says, yes, I want you here with me. I want to experience that with you. That's an amazing thing. And it really rolls right into chapter 5, verse 1 to finish this section. And it's him speaking in verse 1. And he says, I am come into my garden. Watch all the my's in this verse. I have come into my garden. My sister, my spouse. I have gathered my myrrh with my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. Eat, O friends, drink ye. Drink abundantly, O beloved. And so, all ownership, possession, responsibility. That's part of what he's saying here in this is he's saying, I take responsibility for what happens here. You are now me. I'm responsible for you. When you enter a relationship with Christ like this, that he has that now protection of us. You don't think he's just going to abandon you, right? And this is expressed here with all of this. I now take ownership and I take responsibility. This is designed to make the church and you feel secure. This is the way he sees us. This is my garden. This is my everything. And I will take protection of this. So she called to him back in verse 16, and said, come and blow upon my gardens. And now here you see him responding. He comes and he does. And I love that. We've had this verse a few times recently, John chapter 6. Jesus said, all that the Father gives to me shall come to me, and him that comes to me I will in no wise cast out. And she put out the invitation in verse 16, come to my garden. And he says, I'm coming to my garden. You are mine, right? Her call to him will not go unanswered. And your call to him will never go unanswered either. And now it really kicks into gear here with the kind of the trauma in the middle of the story. It starts here in verse 2. And so we're going to go from this stage of perfection, but now we're going to enter into times of indifference. I think it's interesting in this Song of Songs, in this love story, even in this most idyllic situation, it still brings up this idea of indifference, of trauma between them. Even in those times that we don't just outright reject and rebel, there's still times that we can find ourselves indifferent to what Christ wants us to do. Have you found that? And even that alone is missing the opportunities of what Christ really has for us. That's really what happens to her in this chapter now, chapter 5. She experiences a real time of indifference towards him. So take a look at this as she begins. She's going to start speaking here for quite a bit in verse 2 of chapter 5. And these dreams now that she brings up, and I find it interesting, the more she frets and worries, the more she'll talk. And I do the same thing. The more I get nervous, or if I'm in sin, those are the moments when I find myself trying to be in charge, trying to take the lead, trying to do and think, and rather than just sitting peacefully at the foot of the cross and saying, Jesus, what's next? And so she now explains what happens here. Let's do this. Chapter 5, verse 2. I sleep, but my heart waketh. You've had nights like that, right? It is the voice of my beloved that knocks at the door, saying, open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled. Wow. For my head is filled with dew. It's the morning. And my locks are filled with the drops of the night. He's standing at the door. Even in the night, he's here knocking. It's close to the morning. He's inviting her to be with him. And let's see her response here. Verse 3, she continues and says, I have put off my coat. How shall I put it on? I have washed my feet. How shall I defile them? In this culture, right? Once they got into bed, they didn't have heat, so they obviously covered up a lot. I still have a child at the house that has 8,000 blankets. And then because of that, they don't want to get out because it's a completely different temperature once they get out of that cave that they're in. But that's kind of the culture back then, though. They really did have a way to keep themselves warm like that at night. And obviously, when you're outside, your feet are getting dirty, walking in just sandals. You come in for the night. You wash your feet when you're in the house. And you can't go, you just can't go in and out without having to do all of these routines again. It's not that big of a deal, but it's still something that has to be done. So the idea here is that she can't get up a little early and spend some time with him. He's calling to her. He's at the door. He's wanting that time alone again, just him and her. And yet this time, she's indifferent to it. And she says, how can I just went to bed. How can I get up? Have you ever had the Lord wake you up an hour early? Maybe it's the dog. Maybe it's a phone call. I got a phone call this morning at 4:30 something in the morning. And I was like, hello. And they're like, yeah, Alfred. And I was like, not Alfred. Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking for my husband. Not your husband, And what do you do now? You're up an hour early. And it's times like that. Well, that's an hour early for me. I don't know if that's an hour early for you. But you're up, and I really believe that sometimes that the Lord can speak to you in those moments and say, spend that time with me. And maybe it's early, maybe it's late, it's different for all of us. But this is clearly a picture of him coming and calling to her, saying, I'm ready for you. Spend time with me. And she demonstrates, I've already put off my clothes, my feet are clean. No, I can't do it. Complete indifference. See, this isn't done from a position of ignorance. This is done from a position of indifference. See, before we're saved, we don't know any better. We don't know, who, why does he deserve my attention? No, she knows all about that. And yet now she's doing this out of a position of, I know who he is, but I'm either lazy, I'm tired, I'm indifferent, I don't see the value at this moment. And that's the shame of it all. Sometimes we could just get so busy that we put the value in other things and we forsake him, right? So, how simple as it is just to say that for some of us, we're staying up till 3 a.m. doing things that are of a lot less value. And then the Lord calls for us in the morning and we're like out of it. We're not even able to pay attention to him wanting to be with us because we spent 4 hours doing something of very little value before. He's calling and she's indifferent to the call. Verse 4, my beloved, she says, my beloved put in his hand into the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him. Now, this is kind of an ancient thing here with these doors and the way they have their locks. The keyhole could hold notes, or they could hold flowers and different things in the keyhole. So the idea of him putting his hand into the hole of the door, she knew that it was sort of like him leaving a calling card. Like, I've been here and I'm leaving, and that he's leaving something behind to let her know I was here and you missed me. That's the idea. So he's wanting to come and he's just longing to be with her, and he's not just going to leave, but he's leaving something for her. God's love for us compels us towards him, and yet here she's being compelled, but she won't go. See, guys, this has nothing to do with theology. It has nothing to do with learning the great depths of who God is. This has everything to do with communion and that fellowship and that bond. See, these are the tools, these are the things that will keep us from the enemy. Because the deeper you're in love with Christ, the deeper, let me put it to you this way. The deeper you're in love with Christ, your love for other things will pale in comparison. And you'll be able to put things away that you need to put away. You'll be able to do less with some other things that you should do less with. And you'll be more intent on the value of Christ. So verse 5 now, she's going to go figure this out. Verse 5, I rose up to open to my beloved. Now she's going to the door. She's going to open the door for him. And my hands dropped with myrrh, and my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. In other words, he left those flowers in the keyhole for her, and he's not there. Verse 6, I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spoke. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave me no answer. So he left the flowers. I was gone. He's patient. He's so patient. But his patience is not unending. Peter talks about that in the second letter of Peter. It says, some count the patience of the Lord as slackness. And he's like, no, it's not slackness. It's patience, that he wants everyone to be saved. But that patience will come to an end. And we see that even pictured here. He knocks, he's waiting, and then he's like, all right. He didn't leave a nasty gram. Why couldn't you get out of bed? Is that what you think God does to you when you don't get out of bed? Leaves you a nasty gram? No, he's leaving you flowers. He's leaving you a reminder of his love. What? mean, what grace is that? Oh, man. Even in the face of indifference, he would leave a note of his love behind. Not of his anger, not of his disappointment. I can't believe you. No. See, we're all growing in grace. And I think we need to remember to have this heart of Christ for each other. When something goes wrong, let's remember this. That this is his heart towards us, and we should be his image bearers. We should have this same reaction when somebody lets us down. Let each other grow at the rate and at the pace that we're growing. But let's be sensitive to the Lord's calling. When the Lord calls us near, we need to come. Let's be sensitive to that. That's what he wants. When he came to earth, what was one of his names? Emmanuel, God with us. He didn't just from heaven say, I'm going to devise a plan from way up here to save you. He came here because that's his plan, to be with us. He came to the door. In Revelation, it pictures Jesus standing at the door knocking. And it says, anyone that will open unto him, he will come in. And what's it say he will do? Sup with them, right? That's a picture of fellowship. See, he doesn't want to just come in and say, oh, thanks for letting me in. Let's get to the work on the projects. No, he comes in and he says, let's fellowship together. Let's have communion together. Let's fall deeper in love with each other. That's what he wants primarily, right? Martha, Martha, only one thing is necessary. Verse 7. The watchman that went about the city found me. Oh, shoot. Did I skip one? I did. We read verse 4. She put her hand in and she found the flowers. In verse 5. Oh yeah, in verse 6, she sought him. She could not find him. She called for him, but he gave no answer because he had left. And now finally in verse 7, the watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. She's going about the city now looking for him in the early morning. She's basically suffering the consequences of not coming to him in time. Now look, we're not... Isn't it interesting when we often say, I can't find the Lord, or God doesn't talk to me? We often say things like that. But we should first ask the question, well, is there sin in my life that's preventing the Lord from talking to me? Or is there indifference in my life? Have I been the one that the Lord just came to me and I was like, I'm tired, Lord. And then you regret it and you come to him and now you have to look for him. I just am convinced that more often than not, when we're looking for the Lord and he's not right there, it's because of us. It's because of what we did to send him away. Now, these people treat her very harshly in verse 7 as she's wandering about the streets looking for him. People will do that, though. People will treat you much harsher than Christ will. They smite her across the face. What are you doing out here in the streets, woman? Kind of thing. People will treat you that way. That's not the Lord doing that to her. That's these random people. Verse 8, I charge you, she says, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him that I am lovesick, or I'm struck with love. If you find him, tell him, my heart is broken for my loss. That's what she's saying. How do you think the Lord will respond to such a thing? Oh, If you know the Lord, you know how he's going to respond. But let's take it to the next level now. So we've seen the perfection of their relationship as in a garden. We've seen them enter these times of indifference. And now when we go to verse 9, it really picks up now in verse 9 with this idea of coming back to the beginning. You say, well, what is the beginning, Pastor Dan? The beginning is remembering your love for Christ. Remembering who he is and coming back to him. Verse 9, it begins here with a chorus of these daughters of Jerusalem speaking in verse 9. And they say, what is thy beloved more than any other beloved, O thou fairest among women? What is thy beloved more than any beloved that you should do so charge us? Because remember, she's out there saying, if anybody finds him, tell him I'm looking for him. And now all the women of the city are saying, well, why is this guy so important to you? They're almost scoffing, like, you had your chance and you didn't get up. So why is he so valuable to you? What are we missing here? In a world filled with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, is Jesus more important to you? That's their question to her. Is he really more important to you than these other things? Why are you even in the street tonight? How did you get here? It's because I ignored him, right? You remember in Revelation, when Jesus talked to the 7 churches in Revelation, chapter 2 and 3, he spoke to the first one, the church of Ephesus. And through the Apostle John, he told the church of Ephesus how great their works were. You've done great things. The works in your church are wonderful. We could go there and we could read it all, and I won't take the time to do that in Revelation chapter 2. It was a great working church. Many things were getting accomplished. But then he said to them at the end of that section, but you have done this. You have left your first love. You plowed under the garden and you built a factory. And that's never what I had in mind. And he says to them, remember your first love and go back to your first love. Why did the prodigal son return to his father? How many of my father's hired servants have? He treats them good. He's loving, even to the servants. He'll be loving to me. That's what brings you back, right? Romans chapter 2 says the kindness of God works repentance. Remember that when you're talking to people that are walking away from the Lord. It's the kindness of God through you that will work repentance in them. I just heard a story the other day. Travis Carey. I'm going to give away the punchline. Travis Carey is now the pastor of Calvary Chapel, South Portland, Maine. But he wasn't always. He was a scoundrel like a lot of us. They brought him into the residential discipleship program when he was a 20-year-old and lasted 2 months, quit, came back a second time, stoned out of his mind again, lasted 3 days, quit, came back again. And when he came back third time, he's like, all right, I really want to do this. I really want to get this right. And right after he came back the third time, to get right with the Lord and to get off the junk, he got arrested for all the stuff he was doing in between. He's off to county jail. And Ken pulled some strings to get in there to see him in jail. And he did. He got in there to see him after a week or two. And he's like, listen, this might be the Lord telling you, this is it. Like, this is your last chance. Let's get it right. And he did. He stayed in that jail, I don't know how much longer, and just knelt and prayed all the time and said, Lord, change me, make me different. And he did. He came out and he went back to the program, graduated the program. Years later, he is now a pastor. So that's amazing what the Lord can do. But the Lord has to be more valuable to you than anything else in the world. And that's their question to her. Is he really that valuable to you? Or are you just going to go back to some other fling? You're just going to go right back to the other life. Among men's religions, Jesus doesn't even compare. You can't put him in a list with Buddha and Muhammad and Krishna and all those others that succumb to death. Because he doesn't. He's different than that. We have to see him that way. Now in verse 10, she speaks up and she says in verse 10, my beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000, white and ruddy. It really carries the idea of gleaming, yet earthly. Like he's a man's man, but yet he's shiny. He stands out. Man, that is who Jesus is. She's going to go on now and explain and talk about him and what he is like. And it begins there in that verse 10 of talking about how he is gleaming and earthy, the chiefest among 10,000. I mean, is that who Jesus is to you? That's who he needs to be. We need to extol him, uplift him. He's different. People talk a lot about cursing these days, and cursing offends some and doesn't offend others and whatever, right? You take the name of my Lord and you will hear me open my voice. That's the one. We need to stand up and say, no. You just do whatever you want, but don't use his name. I've told people before, I would never use your mother's name like that. Why would you use my Lord's name like that? Of all names, why is it that one, right? So don't let him. He's special. He's different. Don't be offended by every tiny little thing people say, but when they use your Lord's name, use it as an excuse to witness. Oh, are you praying? Is this a prayer meeting? I'm late. Here, let's pray. All right. I heard you say his name. Let's do it. Whatever it takes to change the subject, to get the point across, that's not how you use his name. Verse 11, she continues to talk about his glory, who he is here. Verse 11, his head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black as a raven. That was good in that culture. In verse 12, his eyes are as the eyes of doves by the rivers of water, washed with milk and fitly set. His bearing is regal and royal, right? His hair is full. I wish I had that. Not falling out. And his eyes are at peace is kind of the idea there. Verse 13, his cheeks are as a bed of spices, as sweet flowers. His lips are lilies, dropping sweet-smelling myrrh. Picturing Jesus, the groom. This is the very picture of Christ that will give his face to the beaters, the ones that will beat him. He's beaten so severely he no longer looks like a man, Isaiah 52 and 53 tells us. And yet this is who he is. And he came and allowed himself to be wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was on him. In verse 14, his hands are as gold rings set with the beryl, that is. His belly is as bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. His legs are as pillars of marble set upon sockets of fine gold. His countenance is as Lebanon, excellent as the cedars. His countenance, she's really describing the way he looks at her. So that even in the description of him, she's saying, in the way he looks at me is majestic. His countenance is like Lebanon, excellent with cedars. It's this amazing thing. Have you ever heard? I'm going to give you homework tonight. I won't grade your homework though. Don't worry about that. But you do have homework. You need to go YouTube a guy named S.M. Lockridge, and he has a message that he did, and people have clipped it down to just this part where it's called "That's My King" by S.M. Lockridge. You need to go YouTube that. And he takes like 5-6 minutes to describe Jesus. And he's like, my king is this and that. And all of these descriptions come from the Word of God. And he says, my king is this, my king is this, my king is this. And he's going over the law. And he's boom, 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 laying it out there. And then at one point he goes, oh, I wish I could describe him to you. And he's just boom, boom, laying it out there. And he's getting into it. And it's amazing. And all of it comes straight from the Word of God. That's your homework. You gotta go listen to that. And I just think of that when I think of her description here of her groom. And she says, even when he looks at me, it's amazing. And now verse 16, his mouth is most sweet. Yea, he's altogether lovely. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Everything about him is wonderful, without anything lacking. What a wonderful thing that you can call your love, that's something you choose, that you can call your love your friend. That's amazing. That's a willingness. There's a friendship. There's a willing choice there to become friends. Our relationships shouldn't just be out of necessity. It should be because I want to be in this. Oh man, So many parts we could bring up here. John 15 is one. Remember in John 15 where Jesus says, I no longer call you servants? To paraphrase, he says, I no longer call you servants because servants don't know their master's business. But he says, I call you friends. He can call us friends because he's filled us in on the plan. We're in the know. We're in the inner circle. We're in the bride. We are the bride. And we're his friends. What an amazing thing. And so she describes him here in this glorious way. And it really reminds me, this is the path back. This is always the path back. When we've come to that place of indifference or forgetting who he is, losing and having that distance in our relationship, losing the fellowship, losing our communion, this is always the path back. Remember who he is. It's not doing anything. It's just remember who he is, how awesome he is. That's the path back. There's too many people that are still trying to say, okay, Lord, what do I have to do to come back? You know what his answer would be? Nothing. Nothing. There's nothing you can do. You didn't earn it in the first place. What makes you think there's something you can do to restore it? Right? Paul said it to the Galatians in chapter 3, verse 1. He said, having begun in the spirit, are you going to be made perfect in the flesh? The idea is you got saved because the Holy Spirit came inside of you and gave you a new life that you didn't have before. So that's the way you have to continue. We live by the Spirit every day. We wake up and say, Lord, what's next? What are we doing today, God? That's the way we began. That's the way we continue. We don't pick it up tomorrow and say, okay, what should I do now? Let me take over. And it's the same thing to come back into restoration. We don't say, okay, Lord, what can I do to fix this? You didn't do anything to get it in the first place. What makes you think you can do something to fix it? Oh, I chuckle because it's so common. Don't we always do this? We always do this, I have to fix this. No, all you have to do is remember who he is. Remember how awesome he is. Chapter 6 is pretty short. Let's blast right through this kind of quickly here. It's the beautiful rejoining. Basking in the beautiful rejoining. And I tell you, the rejoining is even sweeter than the initial joining. Because there's not only the realization that he already has a realization that we're not perfect, but now we're in the relationship where even we know that he accepts us for not being perfect. Oh, we thought that before, but now we've experienced it. That he really does accept us, even when we're not perfect. The first verse of chapter 6, again, is these daughters of Jerusalem speaking, and they say, whither or where is your beloved gone? O thou fairest among women, whither is thy beloved turned aside, that we may seek him with thee? Okay, well, since you described him to us, that's a pretty good description. We're kind of down with this now. Where is he? We'll help you. We'll help you look. See, our love should attract others. That's kind of what just happened right there. They're like, oh, you didn't respond to him. Well, why is he so great? She spends all these verses in chapter 5 describing him. And now all of a sudden the daughters are like, wow, we want to follow him too. She's compelled them to want to come to Christ. That should be the same odor that's coming off of us in this world. We should have this posture that just by the way we're in love with Christ, it should make others want to know him. And again, if you feel like you have to put a trip on yourself to do or to become something you're not, it's not like that. I'm not saying you have to all of a sudden become an evangelist that goes and talks to everybody. That's garden, right? Garden. When you're in love with Christ, it will show. Maybe you've already been married, you were engaged. When you were engaged, you had that beam in your eye going on, right? People saw it. You didn't have to force it. Or if you had to force it, maybe you shouldn't have gotten married, okay? But the idea is, when you're in love like that, you're just beaming, you're glowing, and people are like, you're glowing again. You're doing that whole thing. It just comes out. It's natural, and that will attract people. And so these daughters of Jerusalem now in verse 6 are like, okay, we're going to help you find him. We're now attracted ourselves to wanting to learn more about him. So now she speaks in verse 2, my beloved is gone down into his garden to the beds of spices to feed in the gardens and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. He feeds among the lilies. She now rests in the knowledge that she knows where he is. She knows his doings. She knows what his work is. She knows what he's going to be all about. And isn't that what happens? We wander the streets like, I blew it, I blew it. And you're out in the streets and somebody's smacking you around because you're not in the right place. And then you finally gather yourself and you're like, I know where he is. I know where I should be. Everything's okay. He's about his business. I'm about my business now. And she's now going to bring herself back to this place of rest and peace. This idea there, he's among the lilies. Remember back in chapter 2, she saw this image of herself as common. Remember she said, I'm the rose of Sharon, meaning I'm just a typical flower, a common flower in this place of many flowers, she said. And but she never saw herself as a common flower, but she never saw herself as a lily. And that's the way he described her. Remember that? It was chapter 2, verse 1. She said, I'm just the rose of Sharon. I'm just a common flower in this place of many flowers. And then the very next verse of chapter 2, he said to her, no, you're not. You are the lily among thorns. And now that's what she says here in chapter 6. She says, I know where he is. I know where he is. He's gone down into his garden. I am my beloved, and my beloved is mine. He is feeding among the lilies. And she recognizes that there's security there for her. She has this security of knowing he's not going to leave her. Oh, he stood at the door and knocked. She missed the opportunity. But he's not going to leave her. She missed an opportunity. She missed fellowship, communion. She missed opportunities to serve and do and to be with. But they didn't lose relationship. And she sees that, and she realizes that he's still here. She's now at rest in verse 2 and 3. Would you look at his response in verse 4? How well do you know your Lord? If you know him pretty well, you're not going to be surprised by his response here. Verse 4. Thou art beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. There is no rebuke from him. He doesn't say, where were you this morning? That is not in him. There's no rebuke in him that she didn't answer the door, but he's ready to resume the relationship. That is so different than we would be, isn't it? He's right there to say, okay, let's continue. Let's continue. Terrible as an army with banners, it doesn't really carry the meaning. Verse 5. Turn away thine eyes, he continues to talk. Turn away thine eyes from me, for they have overcome me. Thy hair is as the flock of goats that appear from Gilead. Thy teeth are as the flock of sheep which go up from the washing, whereof every one bears twins, and there is not one barren among them. As a piece of pomegranate are thy temples within thy locks. And you're like, Pastor Dan, didn't you just read that? Like, why are you saying it again? Why is he saying it again? There's a very important reason for this. You read it, it's word for word what he said to her before this happened. And so he repeats it after it happened. Do you get it? I have the same love for you now as I had then. I haven't changed. I'm the same guy. I'm the same God. He's not saying this to her to repeat it for his benefit. Like he's just so emotional, like, oh, I'm going to say it again. Oh, did I already say that to you? Sorry. No, it's not that. He's saying it for her benefit. I have the same love for you that I had for you then. And I still have it for you now. Would you think about that the next time you fall and you're like, oh, I can't go back to God. He hates me now. No, he wants you to come back. This is still how he sees you. This is still how he sees us. Verse 8, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. My dove, my undefiled, is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her that bare her. The daughters saw her and blessed her, yea, the queens and the concubines, and they praised her. After all of this, he still sees her as the chosen one, as the undefiled one. I mean, he kicks it up a notch and says, no, you are the chosen one. I have set my affections on you. There's a choice here. He says, no, this is meant to be. You can't ruin it by one day or one event. I've already destined this. This is who we are. Verse 10, who is she that looketh forth as the morning? He's still talking here. Fair as the moon, clear as the sun, and terrible as an army with banners. This marvel of, taking the sinful, the imperfect human and making them fair and clean again. It's unbelievable. Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, great is the mystery of godliness. And I think that this really carries the intention of what Paul was trying to say. Us? You can make us godly? What? I think that really carries the idea that this imagery of this indifference of the bride, the woman, the church, this indifference, and yet she turns back and remembers who he is, and he's right there to embrace her and say, you are still the undefiled one, the godly one. What grace. This mystery of how do you take the sinner and make them the saint? In the New Testament, it speaks of how even the angels desire to look into these things. They're like, how could this be that you take these people and you fix them? You make them white again. It's amazing. Verse 11, it's now her speaking here for the next two verses. Verse 11, I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley. The garden of nuts. Where are they? Washington, D.C.? Or do you know what? I don't know. I don't know where that is. No, actually, it's the only reference in the entirety of the scripture to this garden of nuts. And we don't know what this is. We don't even know the imagery, what it really means, the garden of... I don't think there are any gardens in D.C. anyway. So, okay. So we don't really know what this imagery entails. But she says she went down to this garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley. Maybe they're in San Francisco now. I don't know where this is at. And to see whether the vine flourished and the pomegranates budded, or ever I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Aminadab. And again, that's another reference there in verse 12 that's very obscure to history. It's very unclear on these exact references. I don't think that's the most important thing to nail down the references, but that she responds by going home to the place where she knows he'll be. The garden imagery all over again, the garden with its fruits and the vine that is flourishing. She knows where to go. The garden of nuts, it's unclear, but clearly it is the place of the first ripenings. All of these items listed there are things that would ripen first in the garden. She's ready to start again. And then the chariots of Aminadab. Very difficult to know what that is, but it's clearly a remark of excitement, is the idea. She's excited to do this, to be there, to come back together again. Finally, verse 13, it's really the daughters of Jerusalem with a chorus to end this section, and they say, return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon thy face. What will you see in the Shulamite? As it were and this is the answer, as it were a company of two armies. So now these women who last requested back in chapter 6, they requested to go look for him in chapter 6, verse 1. Well, let us go look for him with you. They now see her again in this place, reunited with him. And they're excited for that. They're excited that she's been united again. She's brought them from this place of, what are you doing out here in the street? Why is your beloved that important? She brought them from that to, well, let's help you look for him. And now finally the chorus of these women in verse 13 is, you've returned, you're here, you're with him, you're reunited. This is good. This is good. And so they're excited. And so now they see her as dancing. That's the imagery in verse 13, that of dancing. This last line of verse 13, as it were a company of two armies, that's actually used. I don't know if you remember the story in the Old Testament with Jacob returning from his time with Laban. Jacob now has his family. He's had the encounter wrestling with the angel of the Lord, and he's returning. And it says in that story of Jacob that Jacob saw two armies. And it specifically tells us that those armies were an earthly army and a spiritual army of angels. And so the insinuation here is that she has this excitement as if she's a company of physical and spiritual armies. It really indicates there's a vigor, there's a life to where she is now. There's a fullness to her excitement of being back in the garden with this earthly, and not just earthly, but this spiritual strength about her. She's been restored. She's where she should be. He's where he should be. And all has been made right again. So, this love, it's love restored is what it is. The lover that would chase down the sinner. You know, if you haven't read Hosea lately, that 15 chapters of Hosea would be a really good supplement to what we're reading right now, where Hosea is told to go chase down that lover and restore her. His wife, go chase her down, bring her back from her sin and restore her. And that really goes so hand in hand with these 3 chapters that we've just looked at right here. That he would track us down and restore us and redeem us. So we begin, this experience on earth, but also in our Christianity, we begin with such an enjoyment in the perfection of what it means to just be living for God, like walking in the garden. That's how it is in the early days of your Christianity, right? I'm saved, it's wonderful. And then there comes times of sin or indifference. Sin can be intentional, but sin can also be lazy. It can also be other things other than just outright rebellions. So those times come and they can really sweep in. And the only path back from that really is remembering who he is. There's no matter of effort, of labor that you can do to bring that back. All we have to do is exactly what he told to the church of Ephesians, the Ephesian church. Remember your first love. Remember your first love. Remember how good he is and let those other things fade away. And when we do that, we will come right back to him. That's when we will then experience the beauty and the joy of restored love. And that is even sweeter than the initial picture that you thought you had. And what an amazing thing. Look, when we finish the book, Lord willing, next week when we're together in chapter 7 and 8, we saw, again, the first 3 chapters, we called it a love that draws us. These 3 chapters, we looked at it from that perspective of a love that restores us. And we're going to finish this book next time, unless the Lord wants to come back. Pause. All right, maybe later. We're going to finish next time with a love that overwhelms us. And this story ends on such a high note. And it's glorious. I hope you could be with us. Unless we're there. That would be even better. That would be even more overwhelming than this. So I want to have Seth, if you can come up and pray to close us out of here. And we're going to sing our final song together. So I just pray that don't get heady with this, but let it go deep into your heart.